Unfortunately, we don't know much about how the Deutsche Waltz was danced in Mozart's time, but we do have a lot of surviving music sources. For instance, 49 German dances by Mozart and 83 by Joseph Haydn. As we shall see later, the popular German dances were normally contrasted with the more sophisticated minuet, but the musical differences between them might not be so obvious to the modern ears. For instance, the signature accompaniment of the 19th century Viennese waltz, the famous un-papa pattern, wasn't much used before the 1800s. There are a few passages where Mozart employs it though. For the most part, the accompaniments of the German dances and the minuets were essentially interchangeable. So how can we tell the difference between the minuet and the Deutscher Tanz? The first obvious difference was the tempo. German dances were supposed to be played faster than the minuet. However, the lack of metronome marks before the 19th century leaves this matter in the hands of the conductor for modern recordings, which is a question we'll talk about later in this video. With regard to specific musical traits, I have identified three key elements that may help to distinguish the minuet from the German dance. First, anacroustic dotted rhythms. Strongly associated with the French music, they appear often in Mozart's minuets, but never in his German dances. On the other hand, when German dances present dotted rhythms, they always start on the strong beat in a similar fashion as the Siciliana. Second, cadences. There are two types of cadences that are especially common in Mozart's German dances. I named them the 6/8 notes cadence and the 4/8 notes cadence. The 6/8 notes cadence always displays the following rhythm. This type of cadence was so characteristic that Mozart includes it even in themes that could still work without it. And this is what Mozart actually did. The 4/8 notes cadence presents this rhythmic pattern. Third, bars grouping. Minuets always follow a clear 2 bars grouping pattern or hypermeter, because that's the length of the basic step unit of this dance, the so-called pas de minuet. In German dances, however, the bar grouping is not so consistent. While most of the time the melodies are built in the same way as in the minuet, there are also passages built by irregular grouping or repetitions of single bar units. The following example is the most extreme case, with one single bar repeated a total of 6 times before the final cadence. Another musical trait in Mozart's German dances that foreshadows common procedures in the 19th century waltz is the presence of syncopated rhythms. And the hemiola, which is the temporal displacement of the metrical perception from triple to dipole meter. The form in Mozart's German dances is very similar to his minuets, usually sets of 6 or 12 dances, each of them structured as a rounded binary form with trio. The major exception to this is the group of German dances K509. Unlike the rest of his German dances, which were all composed in Vienna, the K509 was composed in Prague soon after Mozart's famous Prague Symphony was premiered there in 1787, and this may explain why this work displays some unique stylistic traits compared to the rest. There are two major formal differences between Mozart's German dances and minuets. First, every part of each individual German dance may be built as either rounded binary form or simple binary form, while in minuets only the first option is used consistently. And second, unlike minuets, German dances usually display a final coda. Codas in Mozart are strikingly similar to those by Johann Strauss and Lana around 40 years later. They usually present three parts: a fanfare-like beginning that leads to a fermata, a central section in which a previously heard dance is quoted, and a finale, which is usually played faster and displays a series of tonic pedals and energetic cadences. With regard to instrumentation, there are no major differences between Mozart's German dances and minuets, as both were performed in the same places and by the same orchestras. The woodwind section usually consisted of two flutes, one of which could eventually switch to the piccolo flute if needed, two oboes, two clarinets, and two bassoons. These instruments could appear in different combinations, but usually not all of them at the same time. With regard to the brass section, the most stable instrument was the pair of natural horns. Trumpets were added along timpani only in some specific works, usually in the keys of C, D, and E flat. The string section in Mozart's dances differs from other kinds of orchestral works, as they only display two violin parts and double bass. The absence of cellos in the scores arises some performative questions, as we know that these instruments were available in the dance halls where Mozart's music was usually played. The violas, on the other hand, not only were missing from the scores, but apparently they were also missing from the ballroom orchestras altogether.
So we're all prepared 10 viola jokes.
The Ländler originated as a popular dance in the Upper Austria region, and it was played by itinerant musicians in the taverns along the Danube River. Choreographies involved a wide variety of steps, including foot stomping and hand clapping, and the standard ensemble usually employed two violins and a small three-strings bass called Bessettel. The music of the Ländler was played slower than the other German dances, and it displayed some highly characteristic features such as arpeggiated melodies, voice crossing between the violins, and overall very simple harmonic progressions. This makes the Ländler the epitome of what Eric Mackey calls the artless simplicity of the German dances. In the 1780s, stylized versions of the Ländler for orchestra started to be danced in the cities, and they quickly became a cliché of the idealized Upper Austria pastoral within the wider group of the pastorale music topics. Composers like Mozart or Haydn not only published their own sets of Ländlers, but they also combined the Ländler topic within other types of dances, usually as a form of contrast in the trio section. The Ländler became out of fashion as ballroom dance by the beginning of the 19th century, but some of its features remained as recognizable stylistic marks in other musical contexts. Let's take, for instance, the waltz from the first act of Der Freischütz, the famous Singspiel by Carl Maria von Weber. In the original score, this scene is marked as Walzer. The question is, what kind of Walzer? This is one of those cases where tempo reconstruction makes a big difference, because the musical traits and the pastoral context of the work suggest that the composer was probably evoking the Ländler. The following is a slower version conducted by Leopold Ludwig. Let's compare it to an actual Ländler by Mozart.